So Psalm 22. Um, I've included in your packet with that a copy of Psalm 18. The reason why I included that in your packet is that when you have the opportunity to sit and read that, you will find that it is almost word for word the exact same psalm. There are a few minor word changes, a few things that are a little bit different, but almost exactly the same. If you read the beginning of Psalm 18 at the top, it says, "To the chief musician, a psalm of David, the servant of the Lord, who spoke to the Lord the words of this song on the day that the Lord delivered him from the hand of all of his enemies and from the hand of Saul." And he said, and then it begins to do Psalm 18. So from this description, we would believe that this was likely written early in David's reign. Also, there are some biblical scholars who say some of the comments that David made in here about being clean and righteous and obeying everything, those of us that have spent time going through Samuel recognize that, particularly with the event of Bathsheba and Uriah and what occurred from there, that is not something David could necessarily maybe say. And so, for many reasons, biblical scholars tend to believe this was written early in David's reign. Now, again, remember I told you that 20 through 24 is not in chronological order of Samuel. These are just PSs, epilogues, things that are added to the book of Samuel, so they really don't have any sequence to them. But Samuel would have been written before Psalm, and the Psalm would have been changed according to make it fit musically. All right, because the Psalms were sang to music. Almost 100% of the time they were sang to music. A psalm is just the word that we would use for a song. And so they were put to music. So in order to make David's writings here in chapter 22 fit in a psalm, there were a few words and things that needed to be rephrased and changed to make it flow more beautifully. So this chapter 22 likely would have been written first and then transferred into the Psalm 18 and included in there. Another example is, and people tend not to think about it a lot of times, is that the Psalms are not in chronological order. And the Psalms are not put in there as they're written like a book, like we would have it. They're generally put in there thematically. Or there's different headings as to why they are put in the place that they are put in, but it's not chronological. He didn't write Psalms 1 first and Psalms 50 later, and then all the way down to Psalms 118. They were written at various times and then placed together in a book appropriately. So if this was something that David wrote early on, as most believe, with the exception of some of the comments that he made about, he's kept all the laws of the Lord without fail and that sort of thing. My question would be, do you think that David could speak this psalm in his latter years? So tell me what you think.
You mean Psalm 18?
No, well, they're the same. They're the same.
Yeah, okay.
So if David wrote this early on and it was saying, and it came from the heart, my question to you was, do you feel that at age 75 David would be able to write this?
I don't think David carried around guilt. I think he felt forgiven.
Okay.
He's looking at himself kind of the way God would see him.
Yeah,
Okay.
that's what I think.
Okay.
Ask for forgiveness.
And the fact of the matter is, much of this is about the nature of God.
Right.
David always, one of the things that David does that Solomon isn't nearly as good at, and many of the kings that are going to follow David are terrible at, is that they do some amazing things, and David always gives credit to the Lord for what it is that he does. He knows where his strength comes from. He knows that he has no power. They're too strong. His enemy is too strong for him. He knows that on his own he would not have been able to do any of it. So for that reason, I believe that David would have been able to have written primarily all of this, even later on in his life, because his relationship with the Lord never changes. David fails miserably. And David's reign for Israel was never perfect. Sometimes it wasn't even good, but it was always blessed. Not because David deserved it, but because David's God had chosen David to accomplish a plan or a purpose. So the glory for that blessing goes back to the Lord. And David is known as the greatest king in all of Israel for that reason. We've read all of his failures. Mom made the comment, oh, he's wishy-washy, and that's true. And several have said, well, he's not a great parent, and that's true. And, you know, he's trying to politically maneuver, and that's true. And we could go on and on with some of the things that he's done, and many of them much worse than that. The Uriah thing is probably the pinnacle of his fall, you know, well, if you can say the pinnacle of his fall, is probably the worst thing that David did. And so, but what was David always quick to do? Turn, right? He knew that he had sinned. The minute Nathan said, it's you, he said, oh, I've sinned. I've sinned. Huh?
Something for 34. You can't see. My feet feel like the feet of a deer. My arm is great
when you're 75. Some of that could be a little bit harder. But in his heart, he was still that young warrior man that God went out.
Well, we can take a great lesson from that is that when David repented, and we should take a lesson from that, if we repent from something, we need to go on.
That's right.
Go forward and know that God is with us.
That's right.
We have
That's right, because Aaron and I were having a discussion a couple of days ago about the fact that he was talking to a guy who is looking at Islam. And Aaron said, well, you know, Mom, he's searching for something, and he feels like he's done so many bad things in his life that he could never become a Christian because God's never going to forgive him. So he's looking for, you know, Buddha or Muhammad or somebody out there that he thinks is as he's searching for that. And when we were having that discussion, I thought, you know what? People need to read the stories that we've gone through in this last year. And they need to see the many things that David did. We've never killed anybody that I know of, you know, and if you've done it, don't tell me. And we've never killed anyone, and we've never done many of the things that David did. But David always fell on his face before the Lord because the love for God never weakened in David's heart. And so because of that and because of the God that we serve, you can't do enough bad things to keep you away from God. If you repent and turn and lay it at his feet and ask for forgiveness. And this story is the story that this kid that Aaron was telling me about needs to read and know. I may have done some bad things in my life. I don't think I did that. And God still calls him a man after his own heart and still blesses his reign. Even after he did the Bathsheba and all of that, his reign was blessed. It was the greatest reign in Israeli history. So the lesson that David left goes far beyond just that he was a great king and all of that. It can be taken into so many areas that sometimes I think we forget about.
And
Did you
he
have
was
something?
so quick to repent.
Yes.
That's another
His
lesson
heart.
that we can take from that. Yes, his heart was right, and when he saw that he did it wrong,
Right.
he repented immediately.
And so even though Solomon was a wise man, and even though Hezekiah was blessed by God, and even though some of the kings are going to have some good things, when you come to the prophets, and when you come primarily even, let's say, to the New Testament, and anything is mentioned about the past rule and reign of Israel, who do they always talk about? David. And Jesus is called what? The son of David. And so the praise and accolades for David are enormous. We just talked about all the things he's done, and the praise and the accolades are enormous because he was quick to repent and turn, and his heart never varied from that. You have the first and the
I think that we're righteous righteous. It only becomes because our view of God is right. And when our view of God is right, it affects our behavior. But our behavior isn't what makes us right with God.
That's right.
Absolutely.
That's right. Did you have something you wanted to add?
Add to that, his view of God is reflected by his study of God. All of these terms, rock and refuge and fortress,
Yes.
are Old Testament terms.
Yes.
He's done his homework.
Yes.
He knows God from
Absolutely. He is a man of relationship. You know, something Randy said, I want to throw this out there, and I almost hesitate because it's on tape, but I want it to be taken in the proper context. Remember, this week we had that event of that, there's been two now, young men who at a school shooting ran towards the shooter and took them down. Both of them, the blonde-headed boy who was 17, and then the young Hispanic boy, last name Castillo, they attacked the shooter and protected their classmates from being killed. It was an amazing thing. I mean, the most noble, heroic thing that you can do, without a doubt. However, I've been seeing a bunch of stuff online, and it was talking about, well, their reward will be in heaven, and the reward that, God, I know that God will welcome them into his heaven and give them, praise for what it is they've done. And in my head, I'm thinking, emotionally, we've had that feeling, but scripturally, we need to be reminded of the fact that if these two boys who have made the ultimate sacrifice for their classmates and deserve all the honor and glory that goes with that, as well as anyone who's served in the military and given their life for their country, if they knew the Lord, then yes, they were welcomed in. Well done. If they did not know the Lord, that heroic, noble act is not going to get them into heaven. And when I said that to someone, they said, "Oh, well, great. Why don't you tell their parents that? I'm sure that would bring them a lot of comfort." And I said, "Well, but wait. I'm just telling you what the book says is that if they knew the Lord, then God does honor the fact that they've done that. Just like military men who have given their life for their country, if they knew the Lord when they get to heaven, there's honor that I'm sure that God gives to that. But if someone gives their life for their country and they never knew the Lord, giving your life for your country is not enough to get you into heaven, because it's all about Jesus, and it's all about your relationship with the Lord. And we tend to let our emotions carry us into that, and where that leads us is to this young man who's reaching out for somewhere to say, I've done too many bad things. Whereas if we could take that healing message to people and say, it's never about what you do anyway. It's about who you serve. And that includes these wonderfully young men, all the way down to David, all the way down to this young man that my son was talking with, and everyone in between. But if you can keep that message straight, according to God's word, you can see how it's used. It can be used for great comfort. We need to honor those men that do that ultimate sacrifice. We need to recognize the nobility of that. But that act doesn't get them into heaven any more than anything you or I do is going to get us into heaven. So that's my thing for today. All right. So I think that's probably all we need on that. My recommendation for chapter 22 is that you read Psalm, go through that, see how David has used this. One interesting tidbit that I will state is this particular reading of Samuel 22 is oftentimes used on the last day of Passover, the Passover celebration, the seventh day of the whole week, the feast and all of that. It's read as a prayer of thanksgiving. It was very likely the psalm that was read when the synagogue in San Diego was being attacked here several weeks ago. They were having a special service. It was the last day of Passover, and it's very likely, although I didn't check this, but because it's common and it's normally what's done, it's very likely that Samuel 22 was being read that day as a praise to God at the end of that particular feast. And it's read in every synagogue every year at that particular time. All right. Now, chapter 23, we've got 15 minutes, but we're, again, this isn't going to, this one isn't going to take very much teaching. It's, and Jane, you're gonna get to do some reading on this because it's some weird names, and I decided ahead of time,